continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Floor Goes Cold. Roland Winters was a man who had built his empire on the bones of those who had crossed him. At 42, his construction company controlled half the city's infrastructure projects, but that wasn't what made people fear him. It was the methodical way he dismantled anyone who betrayed his trust. Today, however, all that mattered was the small, still form of his 3-year-old son Danny lying unconscious on their kitchen's marble floor. Victoria. Roland's voice cut through the silence of their Beverly Hills mansion like a blade. His wife appeared from the living room, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the apparent emergency, her blue dress immaculate. She moved with an odd calmness that immediately set Roland's instincts on high alert. "He just ate too much candy," Victoria said, her voice eerily steady as she looked down at their son. "He'll be fine." Roland knelt beside Danny, his contractor's hands surprisingly gentle as he checked for a pulse. The boy's breathing was shallow, his skin pale and clammy. This wasn't sugar crash. This was something else entirely. "How much candy?" Roland's gray eyes fixed on his wife with laser focus. "I don't know. A lot. You know how kids are." Victoria shrugged, but Roland caught the slight tremor in her hands as she smoothed her dress. Without another word, Roland scooped Danny into his arms and headed for his black Mercedes. Victoria followed, her heels clicking on the driveway with measured precision. During the 15-minute drive to Cedar-Sinai Medical Center, she sat in perfect silence, occasionally glancing at her phone. The emergency room moved swiftly once they arrived. Roland held Danny while nurses took vitals and started 4. A young resident began asking questions about what the child had ingested, when suddenly the automatic doors opened and Dr. Trevor Holloway walked in. Roland knew the name. Victoria had mentioned him before as one of the pediatric specialists of the hospital. Tall, distinguished, with prematurely silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from years of saving children's lives. But when Dr. Holloway's eyes found Victoria, something shifted in his expression. The doctor's face went ashen. He took an involuntary step backward, his hand reaching for the wall to steady himself. Roland watched as the man's professional composure cracked like glass. "Nurse Patterson," Dr. Holloway whispered, never taking his eyes off Victoria. "Call security. She's back." The words hit Roland like a physical blow. The bustling emergency room seemed to freeze around them. Victoria's face had gone completely blank, but Roland caught the flash of something dangerous in her eyes. Not fear, but calculation. "I think there's been a mistake," Victoria said smoothly, but her voice had lost its earlier steadiness. Dr. Holloway was already backing toward the nurse's station, his hand fumbling for the phone. "Security to ER Bay 3. Immediately, Roland felt the world tilt beneath his feet. His mind, trained by years of business warfare to process information quickly, began connecting dots he'd never wanted to see. Victoria's unexplained absences, her detailed knowledge of medical procedures, the way she always seemed to know when he was traveling for business. "What's going on?" Roland's voice was deadly quiet, the tone that had made grown men break contracts rather than face his wrath. But before anyone could answer, Danny stirred in his arms, letting out a weak cry. The medical team immediately focused on the child, drawing blood and starting tests. Through it all, Roland watched his wife's face like a hawk studies prey. Security arrived, 2 large men who seemed to know exactly who they were looking for. But Victoria had already moved to Roland's side, playing the concerned mother perfectly. "There must be some confusion," she said to the guards. "I'm here with my sick child." Dr. Holloway was now behind the nurse's station, speaking rapidly into a phone. Roland caught fragments. 3 years. Thought she was gone. Yes, I'm certain. When one of the security guards approached, Roland stepped forward. His presence alone, 6 feet of controlled power in an expensive suit, made the man hesitate. "This is my wife," Roland said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Our son is having a medical emergency." The guard looked between Roland's intimidating presence and Dr. Holloway's obvious distress. In that moment of confusion, Victoria leaned close to Roland. Darling, perhaps we should go to a different hospital. St. Mary's has excellent pediatric care. But Roland's hand closed around her wrist like a steel trap. We're staying here, he said, until I understand what's happening. The look that passed between them was electric with unspoken threat. Victoria had always known her husband was dangerous, but she thought she could control him with the careful manipulation she perfected over their 7 years of marriage. Now, seeing the cold calculation in his eyes, she realized she might have miscalculated. Dr. Holloway had finished his phone call and was approaching with 2 additional security personnel and what appeared to be a hospital administrator. Roland's grip on Victoria's wrist tightened imperceptibly. Mr. Winters, the administrator began, I'm afraid there might be a situation we need to discuss regarding your wife's medical history, Dr. Holloway interrupted, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Mrs. Winters has a history at this hospital that poses certain concerns. Roland looked down at Danny, who was now receiving oxygen and looking slightly better. The blood tests would take time. He had time to get answers. Concerns about what? Roland's question was directed at Dr. Holloway, but his eyes never left Victoria's face. The silence stretched until Victoria finally spoke, her voice regaining some of its earlier confidence. This is obviously a case of mistaken identity. I've never been a patient here before today. But Dr. Holloway shook his head slowly. Not a patient, he said. An employee. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that would eventually become a tsunami. Roland felt something cold and deadly settle in his chest. His wife, his carefully chosen, perfectly presented wife, had worked at this hospital and had somehow left under circumstances so dire that her mere presence warranted security. What kind of employee? Roland asked, though part of him already knew he wouldn't like the answer. Pediatric nurse, Dr. Holloway said, until 3 years ago, when she was terminated for irregularities in patient care. Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. The woman Roland had married, the devoted mother, the society wife who hosted charity galas and spoke passionately about helping disadvantaged children, was someone else entirely. You have no proof of anything, Victoria hissed, dropping all pretense of confusion. Dr. Holloway's laugh was bitter. No proof? 3 children went into unexplained medical distress during your shifts. 3 children who had no reason to crash the way they did. The investigation was ongoing when you simply disappeared. Roland's world crystallized into perfect, terrible clarity. The unexplained bruises on Danny that Victoria always had ready explanations for. The way their son sometimes seemed drugged after spending time alone with his mother. The medical knowledge she displayed at odd moments. And now Danny, unconscious on their kitchen floor after eating too much candy. Without warning, Roland spun to face his wife fully. The movement was so sudden and predatory that both security guards stepped forward, but Roland's attention was focused entirely on Victoria. What did you give him? His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the promise of violence. Victoria straightened, and for the first time since he'd known her, Roland saw who she really was. The mask of devoted wife and mother was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. Nothing that would permanently hurt him, she said with chilling calm. He's my son, too. But Roland caught the tell, the slight emphasis on permanently. His contractor's instincts, honed by years of detecting structural weaknesses, immediately identified the flaw in her statement. This isn't the first time, is it? He said. The silence was his answer. Chapter 2. Foundation Cracks. Roland Winters hadn't become one of the most feared men in Los Angeles by accident. His background was built on a foundation of calculated brutality that few people fully understood. Raised in the foster system after his mother died of a drug overdose when he was 8, he'd learned early that survival meant being harder, smarter, and more ruthless than everyone around him. His first kill had been at 16, a foster father who'd made the mistake of touching his younger sister Lily. Roland had made it look like an accident, and the insurance money had paid for Lily's education. She was now a successful attorney who'd never asked questions about her benefactor's methods. By 25, Roland owned his first construction company. By 30, He controlled the city council through a combination of legitimate business dealings and carefully applied pressure. The three men who had tried to compete with him in those early days had simply disappeared. Their bodies were now part of several building foundations throughout the city. Victoria had been different, or so he'd thought. He'd met her at a charity auction 5 years ago, where she was representing the Children's Hospital as a volunteer. She was beautiful, articulate, and seemed genuinely passionate about helping sick children. When she'd told him about her background in pediatric nursing before becoming a full-time volunteer, it had only made him more attracted to her intelligence and compassion. Their courtship had been perfect. Victoria had been interested in his business, but not grasping, supportive, but not clingy. When she'd gotten pregnant with Danny 2 years into their marriage, Roland had felt something he'd never experienced before: complete contentment. Now, standing in the hospital corridor while Danny stabilized, Roland realized that everything he'd thought he knew about his life was a carefully constructed lie. "Sir," the administrator was trying to get his attention. "Perhaps we could discuss this in private?" Roland nodded curtly. He needed information, and he needed it without Victoria's interference. "Victoria, stay with Danny." But as he turned to follow the administrator, Victoria grabbed his arm. "Roland, you have to understand." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back at her face. In that moment, Victoria saw something in her husband's eyes that made her blood freeze. It wasn't anger. It was the complete absence of emotion that preceded violence. "Take your hand off me," he said quietly. Victoria released him immediately, but the damage was done. Roland had seen her flinch, had recognized the fear in her eyes. Whatever game she'd been playing, she knew she'd lost. In the administrator's office, Roland listened as a clearer picture emerged. Victoria Holloway, not Crane, as she told him her maiden name was, had been a pediatric nurse at Cedars-Sinai for 2 years. During her tenure, there had been an unusual cluster of children who'd experienced mysterious medical episodes during her shifts. Dr. Holloway, Trevor, was leading the investigation, the administrator explained. He was convinced that someone was deliberately causing these incidents, but the evidence was circumstantial. "What kind of incidents?" Roland asked. "Children who should have been stable suddenly crashing. Unexplained seizures. Respiratory distress in kids who'd been breathing normally minutes before." The administrator paused. In each case, Victoria was the last person to check on them before the episodes occurred. Roland absorbed this information with the same methodical precision he applied to structural engineering. And she just left? Disappeared. One day, she simply didn't show up for her shift. When we tried to contact her, her apartment was empty, her phone disconnected. It was like she never existed. "Except she married me 6 months later," Roland said grimly. The administrator's face showed recognition dawning. "Oh my God, she targeted you specifically." Roland had already reached that conclusion. Victoria's sudden appearance at the charity auction, her perfect knowledge of what would attract him, her careful cultivation of their relationship, none of it had been coincidence. What did Dr. Holloway's investigation conclude? Officially? Inconclusive. Unofficially, the administrator leaned forward. Trevor was convinced she was using the children to practice, testing different drugs, different methods, like she was experimenting. The word hit Roland like a physical blow. Experimenting. On children. And then she disappeared and found herself a husband with money, power, and a child of his own to practice on. "I need to see her employment file," Roland said. "I'm not sure I can." Roland's stare cut off the objection. Men didn't tell Roland Winters what he couldn't have. "You can, and you will." 20 minutes later, Roland was staring at a photograph that made his blood run cold. The woman in the employee ID photo looked like Victoria, but younger and with brown hair instead of blonde. But it was the name that stopped his heart: Victoria Holloway. Holloway, the same last name as Dr. Trevor Holloway. "They're related," Roland said. The administrator checked the file. Dr. Holloway never mentioned any family connection to Victoria Crane. Because her name isn't Crane. It's Holloway. Roland's mind was racing through implications. They're working together. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Dr. Holloway's reaction hadn't been recognition of a dangerous former employee. It had been shock at seeing his accomplice in a place where she shouldn't be. The call to security wasn't to protect the hospital from Victoria, it was to protect Victoria from being discovered. Roland stood abruptly. I need to get back to my son. But as he reached the door, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Parking garage, level 3. Come alone, or Danny will have another accident. Roland stared at the message, his jaw clenching. Victoria wasn't just a child abuser. She was actively threatening his son to maintain control of the situation. She'd made her first fatal mistake. Chapter 3. Blueprint for Destruction. Roland pocketed his phone and walked back toward the emergency room with the measured stride of a predator who'd finally identified his prey. His mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating angles and possibilities with the same precision he used to demolish condemned buildings. Danny was awake now, sitting up in his hospital bed and looking confused but healthy. The color had returned to his cheeks, and his breathing was normal. Victoria sat beside him, the picture of maternal concern, but Roland could see the tension in her shoulders. Daddy! Danny reached for him with small arms, and Roland felt a surge of protective fury so intense it took all his self-control not to grab Victoria by the throat right there in the pediatric ward. Hey, buddy, Roland said, forcing his voice to remain gentle as he lifted his son. How are you feeling? Tired. Mommy gave me special medicine because I was being bad. The words hit the room like a grenade. Victoria's face went white, but she recovered quickly. He's confused, she said smoothly. Children often mix up memories when they're sick. But Roland had caught the telltale sign, the way Danny's eyes darted to his mother with unmistakable fear before quickly looking away. It was a behavior pattern Roland recognized from his own childhood in the foster system, the look of a child who'd learned that speaking up brought punishment. Dr. Holloway had returned and was standing near the nurse's station, watching the family tableau with poorly concealed anxiety. When his eyes met Roland's, the man actually flinched. The blood work came back normal, Dr. Holloway said, approaching the bed with obvious reluctance. Whatever was in his system has metabolized out. What would cause those symptoms temporarily? Roland asked, his tone conversational. Several things. Mild sedatives, antihistamines in large doses, certain herbal supplements. Dr. Holloway trailed off, clearly realizing he was providing a roadmap for child abuse. Roland's phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. 5 minutes. Victoria, Roland said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make her look up sharply. Why don't you take Danny to get some ice cream from the cafeteria? I need to discuss his treatment with Dr. Holloway. Victoria hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining her maternal facade and avoiding leaving Roland alone with her accomplice. But refusing would raise questions she couldn't answer. Of course, she said, lifting Danny from Roland's arms. Come on, sweetheart. Let's find you something yummy. As soon as they were out of sight, Roland turned to Dr. Holloway with the full force of his attention. The man actually took a step backward. How long have you been sleeping with my wife? Roland asked conversationally. Dr. Holloway's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I what? I don't. Wrong answer, Roland said. Try again. Mr. Winters, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Roland moved closer, and Dr. Holloway found himself backed against the medication cart. The text messages, the coordinated story, the way you're both trying to control this situation. Either you're sleeping with her, or she has something on you that makes you dance to her tune. Which is it? Dr. Holloway's professional composure cracked completely. You don't understand, he whispered. God, you have no idea what she's capable of. Enlighten me. 3 years ago, I was conducting research on pediatric pain management, experimental protocols, testing new drug combinations on terminally ill children with their parents' consent. Everything was legal, approved by the ethics board. Roland waited, saying nothing. Experience had taught him that scared people filled silence with confessions. Victoria was one of my best nurses. Intelligent, dedicated, seemed to genuinely care about the children. When she suggested certain modifications to the protocols, I listened. What kind of modifications? Testing on healthy children. just to see what would happen. She said it would help us understand the drugs better, make the protocols safer for the terminal patients. Dr. Holloway's voice was barely audible. I was so focused on the potential breakthrough, I convinced myself it was justified. Roland felt something cold and deadly settle in his chest. You experimented on healthy children. It started small, mild sedatives to test consciousness levels, then stronger compounds to test pain responses. We told the parents the children were having complications from routine procedures. Dr. Holloway was sweating now, his confession pouring out like blood from a wound. Victoria documented everything meticulously. She said it was for science. But it wasn't, was it? Roland's voice was deadly quiet. I realized too late that she wasn't interested in the medical applications. She was studying their reactions for her own purposes. The way different drugs affected different children. What caused the most fear versus the most compliance. Dr. Holloway looked up at Roland with haunted eyes. She was learning how to hurt children more effectively. Roland absorbed this information with the same methodical precision he applied to demolishing structures. Find the load-bearing supports, then remove them systematically until the entire building collapsed. And when you tried to stop her, she had recordings, video evidence of my involvement. She showed me just enough to make it clear that if anyone investigated what happened in that pediatric ward, I would go to prison for child abuse while she walked away with a slap on the wrist. So you helped her disappear. Dr. Holloway nodded miserably. I gave her a new identity, helped her create a background that would pass casual inspection. I hoped she would just vanish and never surface again. Instead, she found herself a wealthy husband with a child of his own. When I saw her today, I panicked. I never thought she would be so brazen as to bring a victim to my hospital. Roland's phone buzzed. Another message. Time's up. Parking garage. Now. Dr. Holloway, Roland said, his voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. You're going to help me destroy her. I can't. You don't understand. She has everything documented. If she goes down, she'll take me with her. Roland smiled, and Dr. Holloway felt his blood turn to ice water. It wasn't a human expression. It was the smile of something that ate human expressions for breakfast. Doctor, Roland said conversationally, I've made men disappear for much less than what you've done. The only reason you're still breathing is that I need you functional for the next phase. But make no mistake, when this is over, your life as you know it ends. The only question is whether you spend the rest of it in witness protection or in a shallow grave. Dr. Holloway stared at the man who looked like a successful businessman, but spoke like something that crawled out of the deepest parts of hell. What do you want me to do? He whispered. Roland handed him a business card. My private number. When she contacts you, and she will, you do exactly what I tell you to do. No improvisation, no attempts to protect yourself. You follow my instructions precisely, or I will make your death so slow that you'll beg me to let you confess to every child. Dr. Holloway took the card with shaking hands. And Doctor, Roland added, already walking toward the elevator. If my son suffers so much as a scraped knee while this plays out, I will personally ensure that your death is artistic enough to be featured in medical journals. As the elevator doors closed, Roland allowed himself a moment of pure, cold satisfaction. He had his target identified, his leverage in place, and his first asset recruited. Victoria thought she was playing chess, but Roland had been playing a much more deadly game for much longer. Phase 1 was complete. Time for Phase 2. Chapter 4. Structural Analysis. The parking garage was a concrete monument to urban decay, with flickering fluorescent lights that cast sickly shadows between the support pillars. Roland found Victoria on level 3, standing beside a black BMW that wasn't his car. She was no longer bothering with the concerned mother act. Her posture was predatory, alert. You're late, she said without turning around. Traffic, Roland replied, though they both knew he'd been gathering intelligence. Victoria smiled and finally faced him. In the harsh lighting, with her maternal mask completely abandoned, she looked like a different person entirely. Her blue eyes were cold and calculating, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. So now you know, she said. The question is what you're going to do about it. Roland studied her like he was evaluating a building's structural integrity before demolition. That depends on what exactly I know. Don't play games, Roland. You spoke with the administrator. You interrogated poor Trevor. I used to work here under a different name, and there were some disagreements about my methods. Is Trevor your brother, cousin, or just someone whose career you decided to destroy for fun? Victoria's laugh was like ice crystals forming. Trevor is my ex-husband. Actually, met him in nursing school. Married him when he was an idealistic resident who thought he could save every child in the world. It was adorable, really. The casual way she discussed destroying her ex-husband's life told Roland everything he needed to know about Victoria's capacity for long-term planning and revenge. She wasn't impulsive. She was methodical. And Danny? Roland asked. Danny is my son, too. I would never do anything to permanently harm him. Victoria stepped closer, and Roland caught the scent of her perfume, something expensive and cloying. But children need to learn discipline, Roland. They need to understand consequences. By drugging them unconscious? By teaching them that actions have reactions. That the world isn't safe. That mommy and daddy might not always be there to protect them. Victoria's smile was serene. Danny was getting too comfortable, too confident. He needed to learn that security is an illusion. Roland felt something shift inside his chest, like tectonic plates finding a new alignment. This wasn't just child abuse. It was systematic psychological torture designed to create trauma and dependency. How long, he asked. Since he was 18 months old. Nothing dramatic, just enough to keep him properly anxious. A little Benadryl to make him drowsy and disoriented. Some mild pain medication to teach him that feeling good is temporary. Basic conditioning. The matter-of-fact way she described torturing their toddler made Roland's vision blur red around the edges. But he kept his voice level professional. And this was all practice for what? Victoria tilted her head, studying him. For you, eventually. Did you really think I married you for your sparkling personality? Your means to an end, Roland. A very wealthy, very powerful means to an end. What end? I need someone with your resources and connections to expand my work. The hospital was too limiting, too many ethical committees and oversight boards. But with your money and influence, I could set up something much more comprehensive. Roland's blood turned to ice as the full scope of her plan became clear. A private facility for troubled children, somewhere parents could send their difficult kids for behavioral modification. No pesky insurance companies or state oversight. Just me, my methods, and unlimited test subjects. Victoria's eyes were bright with anticipation. I've already identified several potential properties. Isolated locations where no one would hear anything inconvenient. The woman Roland had married, the mother of his child, was describing a systematic child torture operation with the enthusiasm of someone planning a vacation. And Trevor's role in this. Trevor owes me. His cooperation isn't optional. Victoria's expression hardened. Just like yours isn't. Because you think you have leverage over me? Victoria smiled and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through what appeared to be a video gallery and selected one. The screen showed Danny's bedroom from a hidden camera angle, with the boy sleeping peacefully in his race car bed. I have cameras throughout our house, Roland. 7 years of footage of you being an absent father. Traveling constantly for business, leaving your son with nannies and babysitters. Missing birthdays, school events, bedtime stories. Victoria's voice took on a mock-sympathetic tone. And now, evidence of you attacking me in a hospital parking garage when I was just trying to discuss our son's medical needs. Roland realized she was recording their conversation with a second phone positioned near the BMW side mirror. Any family court in the country would give me full custody after seeing the evidence I compiled. And once Danny is exclusively in my care. Victoria shrugged. Well, accidents happen to children all the time. The threat was crystal clear. Roland could expose her, but she would disappear with Danny before any court proceedings could protect his son. And wherever she took him would be a place designed specifically for hurting children. What do you want? Roland asked. $50 million transferred to an account I'll provide. Purchase of the property I've selected in Montana. and your complete cooperation in establishing my facility." Victoria's smile was triumphant. "In exchange, I continue being the perfect wife and mother, and Danny grows up safe and healthy. And if I refuse, then you'll never see either of us again. And Danny will become my primary research subject for the rest of his very short life." Roland nodded slowly, as if considering her terms. In reality, he was calculating angles of attack, identifying weak points in her plan, and determining the most efficient way to ensure that Victoria never threatened another child. "I'll need time to arrange that kind of transfer," he said. "You have 48 hours. And Roland—" Victoria stepped close enough that her breath touched his face. "Don't even think about trying to outmaneuver me. I've been planning this for 7 years. Every possible move you might make has already been accounted for." Roland looked down at the woman who'd shared his bed, borne his child, and fooled him completely for years. "You're probably right," he said. Victoria's smile faltered slightly at his easy capitulation, but she recovered quickly. "Smart man. I always knew you were intelligent enough to recognize a superior opponent." As Roland walked back to his car, he was already mentally reviewing his resources. Victoria was right about one thing. She'd been planning this for years and had anticipated most conventional responses. But Victoria had made one critical error in her calculations. She'd assumed that Roland was conventional. By the time Roland reaches Mercedes, he'd already identified 3 different ways to kill her that would look like accidents, mapped out the locations of 6 men who owed him favors dangerous enough to murder 4, and calculated exactly how long it would take to make her disappear so completely that not even dental records would remain. Victoria thought she was playing chess, but Roland had been playing a much older game, one where the only rule was that the strongest player left the table alive. The 48-hour countdown had begun, but it wouldn't take Roland nearly that long to end this. Chapter 5. Load-bearing walls. Roland drove home through the winding streets of Beverly Hills with the methodical precision of someone following a blueprint. His mansion sat on 3 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, surrounded by walls that offered privacy and security. What Victoria didn't know was that those walls had been designed for more than keeping out unwanted visitors. They were also excellent for keeping things in. Danny was exhausted from his hospital adventure and fell asleep in the car before they reached the gate. Roland carried his son upstairs, noting how the boy's small body seemed to relax completely only when Victoria wasn't in sight. Another data point filed away for future reference. "He'll be more tired than usual for the next day or 2, Victoria said, following them upstairs. She'd seamlessly slipped back into her maternal persona the moment they'd returned to public view. Side effects from whatever made him sick. Roland tucked Danny into bed and kissed his forehead. "Sleep tight, buddy." As they walked downstairs, Victoria's phone chimed with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled. "Trevor wants to meet tomorrow. He's concerned about our situation." "I'm sure he is," Roland replied. "Would you like a drink? I think we should discuss your proposal properly." Victoria looked surprised, but pleased. "That sounds civilized." Roland poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and handed Victoria a glass of wine, her favorite vintage from his personal collection. They settled in his study, a room lined with architectural drawings and construction awards that spoke to his legitimate business success. "To new partnerships," Victoria said, raising her glass. Roland nodded and drank, studying his wife over the rim of his glass. She was beautiful, intelligent, and completely without conscience. Under different circumstances, he might have admired her calculating nature. Instead, he was planning to use it against her. "Tell me about the Montana property," he said. Victoria brightened, clearly enjoying the opportunity to discuss her vision. "It's a former boarding school, closed 15 years ago after some financial irregularities. Isolated, self-contained, with dormitories that could house up to 60 children. The local community is small and economically depressed. They'd welcome any business that brought jobs." "How many children are you planning to treat?" "Initially, maybe 20. Carefully selected cases from wealthy families who want their problems to disappear quietly. Children with behavioral issues, developmental delays, anything that makes them inconvenient." Victoria's eyes gleamed. The parents would pay premium rates for specialized, discreet care. Roland nodded, as if considering the business model. And your research protocols? Much more comprehensive than what I could do at the hospital. Pain tolerance studies, psychological conditioning experiments, pharmaceutical testing. We could advance pediatric medicine by decades. The casual way she discussed torturing children for profit made Roland's hand tighten on his glass. But he kept his expression neutral, even encouraging. Would you want to begin operations? Within 6 months. I already have potential staff identified. People with the right combination of medical training and flexible ethics. Trevor will handle the legitimate medical oversight, and I'll manage the actual research. Roland set down his glass and walked to the window overlooking his pool. The water was lit from below, creating an ethereal blue glow in the darkness. Victoria, he said without turning around, what happened to the 3 children at the hospital? The question hung in the air like smoke. Roland could hear the sharp intake of Victoria's breath, followed by the soft clink of her wine glass being set down. What do you mean? She asked carefully. The 3 children who had medical episodes during your shifts. The ones Trevor was investigating. What actually happened to them? The silence stretched until Roland finally turned around. Victoria was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. They recovered, she said finally. All of them? Of course. I would never. Victoria. Roland's voice cut through her protestation like a blade. What happened to them? This time the silence was longer. Victoria seemed to be weighing her options, calculating risks and benefits. Finally, she smiled. A real smile, not the manufactured warmth she usually displayed. You really want to know? Roland nodded. The first one was just an accident. A miscalculation with the sedative dosage. But watching him struggle, seeing how the drugs affected his system, Victoria's voice took on a dreamy quality. It was educational. So the second time was intentional. And the third, they died. They contributed to medical science. Their families received large settlement payments for the hospital's negligence. Everyone benefited. Roland absorbed this information with the same methodical precision he'd applied to learning construction techniques. Victoria wasn't just planning to hurt children. She was planning to kill them, systematically and for profit. And you documented everything? Meticulously. Video recordings, physiological data, psychological assessments. The complete records are stored in a secure location along with evidence of Trevor's involvement. Victoria's smile widened. Insurance against future problems. Roland nodded slowly. Show me. Victoria looked surprised. Excuse me. The documentation. If we're going to be partners, I need to understand the scope of your work. Victoria hesitated, clearly torn between pride in her achievements and caution about revealing too much. But her narcissism won out. Very well, but this stays between us. She retrieved a laptop from her purse and powered it on. The screen displayed a folder system organized with obsessive precision. Subject files, video recordings, medical data, financial records. Victoria clicked on one of the video files. Roland forced himself to watch 30 seconds of a 7-year-old boy being systematically tortured while Victoria provided clinical narration. When she paused the video, his expression remained perfectly controlled. Impressive documentation, he said. Victoria beamed with pride. Each subject provided unique insights into pain tolerance, fear responses, and psychological conditioning. The data is invaluable. Roland walked back to the window, ostensibly to refill his drink. In reality, he was activating a hidden recording system built into his study's walls. Every word of their conversation was now being documented with professional-grade audio and video equipment. Victoria, he said, returning to his chair, I think you may have found the perfect partner. Her smile was radiant. I knew you'd understand eventually. We're going to accomplish something truly revolutionary. Roland raised his glass in a toast. To revolution. As Victoria drank, Roland reflected on the irony of the situation. She thought she'd trapped him with threats and blackmail, but she'd actually provided him with everything he needed to destroy her completely. The recordings of her confessions, combined with the evidence on her laptop, would be more than sufficient to ensure she never hurt another child. But Roland wasn't interested in simply stopping Victoria. He was going to make sure she experienced every bit of fear and helplessness she'd inflicted on her victims. The real game was just beginning. Chapter 6: Demolition Planning. The next morning, Roland woke before dawn and made his way to the gym in his basement. The space had been designed for more than fitness. It was where he came to think through complex problems that required violent solutions. As he worked through his routine, lifting weights with mechanical precision, his mind arranged the pieces of his plan like a master chess player, setting up an endgame. Victoria was still sleeping when he returned upstairs. She'd been unusually affectionate the night before, clearly believing she'd won their psychological battle. Roland had played the part of the defeated husband perfectly, even allowing her to think her seduction had been effective rather than nauseating. Danny was already awake, sitting in his room and playing quietly with toy trucks. The boy looked up when Roland entered, and the mixture of hope and wariness in his expression broke something inside his father's chest. "Hey, buddy," Roland said, sitting on the edge of the small bed. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Danny said softly. "Daddy, why did Mommy give me medicine when I wasn't sick?" The question hit Roland like a physical blow. Despite Victoria's careful conditioning, their son was beginning to understand that something was wrong with his mother's behavior. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," Roland said carefully. "But I promise you, Danny, no one is ever going to give you medicine unless you really need it." Danny nodded, but Roland could see the confusion in his eyes. The boy was trying to reconcile his love for his mother with his growing awareness that she wasn't safe. "Daddy," Danny's voice was even smaller now. "Am I bad?" "What?" "No, Danny. Why would you think that?" "Because Mommy says I need to be punished when I'm bad. And she gives me the sleepy medicine when I'm being bad." Roland felt white-hot rage flood through his system, followed immediately by ice-cold calculation. Victoria hadn't just been drugging their son. She'd been convincing him that he deserved it. "Listen to me very carefully," Roland said, taking Danny's small hands in his own. "You're not bad. You have never been bad. And no one has the right to hurt you for any reason." Danny's eyes filled with tears, and Roland pulled his son into a fierce hug. Over the boy's shoulder, he caught sight of Victoria standing in the doorway, watching them with an unreadable expression. "How touching," she said. "But I think Danny needs to get ready for preschool." Roland released his son and stood, putting himself between Danny and Victoria. "Actually, I thought we'd spend the day together. Father-son time." Victoria's smile was sharp. "Danny needs routine, Roland. Consistency is important for children." "I agree completely," Roland said, "which is why from now on, I'll be handling all decisions regarding Danny's schedule, his activities, and his medical care." The standoff stretched between them while Danny watched from his bed, clearly sensing the tension even if he didn't understand its source. "We discussed this last night," Victoria said carefully. "I thought we'd reached an understanding about responsibilities." "We did, and I'm taking responsibility for my son's welfare." Roland's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Permanently." Victoria's mask slipped slightly, revealing a flash of pure fury before she recovered her composure. "I think you're being emotional, darling. Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss. Danny stays with me today." After a tense breakfast where Victoria maintained her maternal facade while Roland watched her every movement, she finally left for what she claimed was a spa appointment. Roland immediately called his head of security, Marcus Chun, one of the few men in Los Angeles who knew exactly what Roland was capable of and had never judged him for it. "I need complete surveillance on my wife," Roland said without preamble. "Where she goes, who she meets, what she does. And I need it starting now." "How complete?" Marcus asked. In their working relationship, this was code for asking whether the surveillance was for intelligence gathering or target assessment. "Complete enough to protect my son," Roland replied, which was code for target assessment. "Understood. Anything else?" "How quickly can you have our Montana contacts compile a full background on a closed boarding school property? Something that's been on the market for 15 years. By tonight if it's important." It's important. After ending the call, Roland took Danny to his office building downtown. The boy was fascinated by the construction equipment visible from the 42nd floor windows, and Roland found himself actually relaxing for the first time in 24 hours as he explained how cranes worked and buildings grew. "Daddy, do you build everything?" Danny asked, pressing his face against the glass. "Just the important things," Roland replied, which was more truth than poetry. His construction company was responsible for most of the city's critical infrastructure, giving him access and influence that few people fully understood. His private phone buzzed with a text from Victoria, "Having lunch with Trevor to discuss our timeline. See you tonight." Roland smiled and forwarded the message to Marcus. Within minutes, his security chief responded with an address and confirmation that surveillance was in place. An hour later, Marcus called with an update. "Your wife isn't at the restaurant she mentioned. She's at a storage facility in Glendale, and she's not alone." "Trevor?" "Negative. Unknown male, approximately 35, expensive suit, drives a Mercedes with government plates." Roland felt pieces clicking into place. Government plates? DMV shows the car registered to the Department of Health and Human Services, Child Protective Services Division. The implications hit Roland like a sledgehammer. Victoria wasn't just planning to expand her operation. She was already cultivating relationships within the system designed to protect children. Someone inside CPS was either helping her or was already under her control. "I need everything you can find on whoever she's meeting with," Roland said. "Background, finances, family weaknesses. Everything. Already on it. But boss, there's something else you should know." "What?" "The storage facility? It's registered under the name Victoria Crane. She's been paying for it since before she married you." Roland ended the call and walked to his window, looking down at the city spread below him like a model he was preparing to rebuild. Victoria had been planning this operation for longer than their entire marriage. She'd chosen him specifically because his resources and connections would be useful, and she'd spent years documenting his behavior to ensure her leverage. But she'd made one critical error in her planning. She'd assumed that Roland's love for his son made him vulnerable, that his paternal instincts would force him to comply with her demands rather than risk losing Danny. She was right about his love for Danny, but she was catastrophically wrong about what that love would make him do. Roland's phone rang, and Dr. Trevor Holloway's name appeared on the screen. "Mr. Winters? We need to meet. Tonight. There are things about Victoria that you don't know, and if we don't stop her soon, a lot more children are going to die." Roland smiled, watching his reflection superimposed over the city skyline. Victoria thought she was playing a complex game of manipulation and control, but she'd actually assembled all the pieces Roland needed to destroy not just her, but the entire network she'd built around her operation. "Doctor," Roland said, "I think it's time we had a conversation about exactly what you're willing to do to make this right." The demolition phase was about to begin. Chapter 7. Controlled Explosions. Trevor Holloway looked like a man who hadn't slept in days when he met Roland at a 24-hour diner in Westwood. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his hands shaking slightly as he wrapped them around a coffee cup like it was an anchor. "She's accelerating the timeline," Trevor said without preamble. "The Montana facility, the new victims, everything is moving faster than she originally planned." Roland sat across from him, noting the dark circles under the doctor's eyes and the nervous way he kept glancing at the diner's windows. "What changed?" "You did. She thinks you're going to comply, but she doesn't trust it. Victoria never trusts anyone completely." Trevor leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "She's planning to take Danny and disappear within the week, with or without your cooperation." "Where?" "The Montana property. She's already arranged for a small staff to begin operations immediately. If she gets Danny there." Trevor's voice broke. "That place is designed to be invisible. No oversight, no inspections, no way for anyone to trace what happens inside." Roland absorbed this information with characteristic calm, though inside he felt the familiar coldness that preceded violence. "Who's helping her?" Trevor pulled out his phone and showed Roland a photograph taken from a distance. It showed Victoria talking animatedly with a heavy-set man in a suit outside the storage facility. Robert Klein, senior case worker with Child Protective Services. Victoria has been cultivating him for 2 years, feeding him information about troubled children who might benefit from specialized care. He knows what she's planning. Not the details, but he knows enough. Victoria has shown him carefully edited documentation of her success stories, children who were supposedly helped by her methods. She's convinced him that traditional therapy is inadequate for severe behavioral problems. Roland studied the photograph, memorizing the man's face, and he has the authority to remove children from their homes. More than that, he can authorize placement in private facilities with minimal court oversight, especially if the parents are deemed unfit or dangerous. Trevor's hands were shaking more noticeably now. She's built a pipeline, Roland. Parents who ask too many questions about their children's injuries get investigated by CPS. When they're found to be abusive, their children get placed in Victoria's care. The scope of Victoria's operation was even more sophisticated than Roland had realized. She wasn't just planning to hurt individual children. She was systematically corrupting the system designed to protect them. How many children are already involved? I don't know for certain. But the storage facility contains medical records for at least 15 children, all supposedly receiving specialized treatment at various private facilities. Trevor pulled up another photo on his phone. This is from inside the storage unit. Victoria doesn't know I have access, but I've been documenting everything. The image showed rows of filing cabinets and boxes labeled with clinical precision. Roland could see medical equipment, video recording devices, and what appear to be pharmaceutical supplies. She's preparing for full-scale operations, Roland said. Worse than that, she's preparing to franchise the operation. The Montana facility is just the pilot program. If it's successful, she plans to establish similar facilities in other states. Roland felt something shift inside his chest, like tectonic plates finding a new and more dangerous alignment. Victoria wasn't just a child abuser. She was an entrepreneur planning to industrialize child torture. Trevor, Roland said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, I need you to do exactly what I tell you when I tell you to do it. No questions, no hesitation, no attempts to protect yourself. Do you understand? Trevor nodded frantically. What do you want me to do? First, you're going to call Victoria and tell her that I've been asking questions about her medical background. Express concern that I might be planning to expose her operation. That will make her paranoid. She might accelerate her timeline even more. That's the point. I want her off balance and making mistakes. Roland pulled out his phone and showed Trevor a number. When she contacts you again, and she will, you're going to arrange a meeting at the storage facility. Tell her you have new evidence that could implicate both of you, and you need to destroy it immediately. She'll suspect a trap. She'll suspect betrayal, but her arrogance will convince her that she can handle whatever you're planning. Roland's smile was cold and predatory. Victoria's greatest weakness is that she believes she's the smartest person in any room. Trevor stared at him with growing understanding. You're going to be waiting at the storage facility. Among other things, Roland stood and placed a $20 bill on the table. Trevor, what happened to the children at the hospital, all of them, is going to become public knowledge. The only question is whether you're remembered as an accomplice or as the whistleblower who helped stop a monster. As Roland walked toward the diner's exit, Trevor called after him. What about the man from CPS? Klein. Roland paused at the door. Mr. Klein will be dealt with appropriately. 3 hours later, Roland was in his office when Marcus called with an update. Your wife received a call from Dr. Holloway approximately 30 minutes ago. She immediately left her hotel and is currently driving toward Glendale. We also have complete background information on Robert Klein. What did you find? Divorced, 2 children he rarely sees, gambling debts totaling approximately $200,000. He's been receiving regular cash payments from a shell company that traces back to your wife. How regular? Monthly for the past 18 months. Enough to cover his debts and maintain his lifestyle, but not enough to be financially independent. Roland nodded. Klein was a classic asset, compromised, dependent, and expendable. Victoria had probably been planning to eliminate him once her operation was fully established. Where's Klein now? His office. Normal workday. No indication he knows anything unusual is happening. Good. What about the Montana property? Purchased 3 days ago through another shell company. Work crews arrived yesterday to begin renovations. The local sheriff's department has been told it's going to be a private retreat for wealthy families. Everything was moving exactly as Roland had anticipated. Victoria was rushing to implement her plan, making herself vulnerable in the process. But Roland had one more piece to put in place before the final phase could begin. Marcus, I need you to pick up Danny from preschool and take him to the safe house in Malibu. Tell him it's a special vacation with Uncle Marcus while Daddy handles some important business. Security level? Maximum. No one gets near him except you and the team. And Marcus. Roland's voice carried the weight of absolute command. If anyone tries to take my son, anyone, you have my authorization to use whatever force is necessary. Understood. As Roland ended the call, he reflected on the irony of the situation. Victoria thought she was moving pieces around a chessboard, manipulating her ex-husband and controlling her current husband through threats and blackmail. But she'd actually provided Roland with everything he needed to destroy not just her, but the entire network of accomplices and enablers she'd built around her operation. The controlled demolition was about to begin, and when it was over, there wouldn't be enough left of Victoria's world to fill a shoebox. Chapter 8. Total Structural Collapse. The Glendale storage facility looked innocent enough from the outside. Rows of identical units behind chain-link fencing, designed for people storing household goods and seasonal decorations. Unit 247 contained something much darker, and by 9 p.m., it would become the site of the most carefully orchestrated destruction Roland had ever planned. Roland arrived 2 hours early, using bolt cutters provided by Marcus to gain access through a service entrance. The security cameras had been disabled through methods that Marcus assured him would leave no traceable evidence. Roland made his way to the unit's rear access point and settled in to wait. At 8:45 p.m., Trevor's Mercedes pulled into the facility parking lot. Victoria's BMW arrived 3 minutes later. Roland watched through a small gap in the unit's rear wall as they approached, their body language tense with mutual distrust. "This better be important, Trevor," Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "I have a flight to catch in 6 hours." "Flight to where?" Trevor asked. "Montana, obviously. The advance team is already preparing the facility." Victoria unlocked the storage unit and gestured for Trevor to enter first. "After you." Trevor hesitated, clearly recognizing the tactical disadvantage of entering first, but Victoria's impatient expression left him no choice. As soon as they were both inside, Roland activated a jamming device that would block all cell phone signals within a 50-foot radius. The storage unit was exactly as the photographs had suggested: rows of filing cabinets, medical equipment, and boxes of documentation. But what the photographs hadn't shown was the sophisticated video recording setup positioned to capture everything happening inside the unit. "What new evidence?" Victoria demanded. Trevor fumbled with one of the filing cabinets, his hands shaking. "Hospital security footage from the pediatric ward. From the nights when those 3 children died." Victoria went completely still. "That footage was destroyed." "Officially, yes. But I made backup copies before the hospital's internal investigation concluded." Trevor's voice was gaining strength as he delivered the lie Roland had coached him to tell. "High-definition video of you entering their rooms, administering unauthorized medications, and documenting their reactions." "You're lying." "Am I?" Trevor pulled out a tablet and showed Victoria a video file icon. "Shall we watch it together?" Victoria lunged for the tablet, but Trevor yanked it away. In that moment of distraction, Roland emerged from his hiding place behind the medical equipment. "I think we should all watch it together," Roland said. Victoria spun toward him, her face cycling through surprise, rage, and calculation in rapid succession. "Roland, how domesticated of you to follow your wife. Actually, I'm here for something else entirely." Roland stepped closer, and both Victoria and Trevor instinctively backed toward the unit's entrance. I'm here to collect evidence. Evidence of what? Roland smiled and gestured toward the hidden cameras that had been recording their conversation. Evidence of conspiracy to commit child abuse, murder, and racketeering. Evidence of your confession to killing 3 children. Evidence of Dr. Holloway's willing participation in your experiments. Trevor looked confused. But I'm cooperating with you. But you were an enthusiastic participant for 2 years before you grew a conscience. Roland's voice was conversational, almost friendly. Did you really think I was going to let you walk away from this? The realization hit Trevor like a physical blow. You're recording everything. Comprehensive documentation. Video, audio, digital evidence, financial records. Everything needed to ensure that both of you spend the rest of your lives in maximum security prisons. Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. The woman who'd played devoted wife and mother for 7 years was replaced by something cold and reptilian. You have no idea what you're doing, she hissed. I have Robert Klein completely under my control. I have documentation of your own negligence as a father. I have connections within the foster care system who will ensure Danny disappears completely if anything happens to me. You had those things, Roland corrected. Past tense. Victoria pulled out her phone to call Klein, but the jamming device rendered it useless. Her growing panic was visible as she tried different numbers with the same result. Robert Klein is currently in federal custody. Roland continued conversationally. It's amazing how quickly someone talks when they're shown evidence of accepting bribes to facilitate child abuse. He provided a complete list of all the children you've treated through his referrals. Trevor was backing toward the storage unit's entrance, but Roland's next words stopped him cold. Don't bother running, Doctor. Federal agents are positioned throughout this facility. The moment you step outside this unit, you'll be arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, child abuse, and racketeering. But I'm cooperating. Trevor's voice was desperate. You're confessing. There's a difference. Roland pulled out his phone, which was connected to an external antenna that bypassed the jamming. Your cooperation will be noted during sentencing, but it won't change the fact that you helped kill 3 children. Victoria had been listening to this exchange with growing fury, but now she smiled with something approaching her old confidence. Very clever, Roland. But you've made one crucial mistake. She reached in her purse and pulled out a small device that looked like a garage door opener. This facility, all the evidence stored here, and everyone inside this unit will be completely destroyed in approximately 10 minutes. Roland looked at the device with professional interest. Incendiary charges? Military grade. Thermite composition that will burn hot enough to destroy every piece of evidence and leave nothing but unidentifiable ash. Victoria's smile was triumphant. I always plan for contingencies. So do I, Roland said. He pressed a button on his own phone, and immediately the sound of sirens filled the air. Through the storage unit's entrance, red and blue lights became visible as multiple emergency vehicles converged on the facility. Fire Department Hazardous Materials Team, Roland explained. Amazing how quickly they respond when someone reports a terrorist threat involving incendiary devices. Victoria stared at him with dawning comprehension. You knew about the charges. I knew you wouldn't come here without an exit strategy. The same way I knew you tried to take Danny to Montana, whether I cooperated or not. Roland stepped closer, and Victoria found herself pressed against the filing cabinets. The difference between us, Victoria, is that I've been planning your destruction since the moment I realized what you were. You've been planning contingencies. I've been planning total war. The sound of heavy boots on pavement indicated that the facility was being surrounded. Roland continued as if they were having a casual conversation. Federal agents are currently searching our house and seizing all your electronic devices. Your storage units in 3 other states are being simultaneously raided. Your contacts within the foster care system are being arrested on federal charges. Your Montana facility is being shut down by Child Protective Services from 4 different states. Victoria's face had gone completely white. That's impossible. You couldn't have organized all of that in 2 days. I didn't. I've been organizing it for 7 years. Roland's smile was genuinely pleased. Did you really think I didn't investigate my wife's background when we got married? I knew who you really were before our second date. The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. Then why? Why did I marry you? Because I needed evidence of your crimes that would stand up in federal court. Because I needed to document your methods and identify your network. Because the only way to ensure you never hurt another child was to let you think you were successful until I had everything I needed to destroy you completely. Trevor was staring at Roland with a mixture of horror and admiration. You've been planning this for 7 years. Every conversation, every argument, every moment of apparent affection was part of building a case against her. Roland's voice carried no emotion. The recording equipment in our house, the financial surveillance, the background checks on everyone she met, all of it designed to document her crimes and identify her accomplices. Victoria's hands were shaking now, but with rage rather than fear. And Danny, you used your own son as bait. I protected my son while gathering evidence against his would-be killer. Roland's voice finally carried emotion, cold, implacable fury. Danny spent the last 3 years with trained security personnel disguised as nannies and babysitters. Every moment you thought you were alone with him, every time you drugged him or hurt him, was being documented and transmitted to federal investigators. The sound of tactical teams entering the facility was clearly audible now. Roland checked his watch. In approximately 30 seconds, this storage unit will be surrounded by federal agents. You have 2 choices: surrender peacefully and spend the rest of your life in prison, or resist arrest and be killed in the process. Victoria's eyes were wild now, darting between Roland and the approaching tactical teams. You don't understand. I have evidence that could destroy you too. The things you've done to build your business empire are completely legal, if ethically questionable. Roland's smile was sharp. Unlike systematically torturing children to death for scientific research, the tactical team reached the storage unit's entrance, their weapons trained on the 3 occupants. The team leader's voice was amplified and authoritative. Victoria Holloway, Dr. Trevor Holloway, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, child abuse, and racketeering. Step away from each other and keep your hands visible. As federal agents swarmed the storage unit, Roland stepped back to let them work. Victoria's last words to him were barely audible over the sound of handcuffs clicking into place. This isn't over. Roland leaned close enough to whisper in her ear. Yes, it is. And Victoria, every child you ever hurt is going to know that you'll never hurt anyone again. As they led her away, Victoria finally understood the true scope of her defeat. Roland hadn't just caught her. He'd systematically destroyed every aspect of her operation while she thought she was manipulating him. The game had never been chess. It had been demolition, and Roland was a master builder who knew exactly how to bring down structures that others thought were indestructible. Chapter 9, Foundation Reset. 6 months later, Roland sat in his office overlooking downtown Los Angeles, reading the final sentencing report. Victoria had received life without parole on 3 counts of first-degree murder, plus additional sentences for child abuse, racketeering, and conspiracy that would have kept her in prison for several lifetimes, even if the murder charges had been dismissed. Trevor Holloway had received 25 years as part of his cooperation agreement. His medical license had been permanently revoked, and he would spend the rest of his life in protective custody, as child abusers were notoriously short-lived in general population. Robert Klein and 7 other Child Protective Services employees had received sentences ranging from 10 to 15 years for their roles in Victoria's network. The federal investigation had expanded to include CPS offices in 12 states, resulting in the largest child welfare corruption scandal in American history. A soft knock on his office door interrupted Roland's reading. "Come in." Danny entered, followed by Marcus Chun. The boy had grown noticeably taller in the 6 months since Victoria's arrest, and the perpetual anxiety that had shadowed his eyes was finally beginning to fade. "Daddy, Uncle Marcus taught me how to tie knots today," Danny announced, proudly displaying a piece of rope with several complex knots. He says every man should know how to tie things properly. Roland smiled, genuinely pleased. That's very important knowledge. Show me what you learned. As Danny demonstrated his newfound skills, Roland reflected on the changes in his son's behavior since Victoria's removal from their lives. The boy slept through the night now, no longer waking up in terror from nightmares he couldn't explain. He played with uninhibited joy, no longer flinching when adults moved too quickly near him. Most importantly, he was beginning to trust that the adults in his life would protect him rather than hurt him. Danny, Roland said, why don't you show Uncle Marcus the new construction site models in the conference room? I'll be there in a few minutes. After they left, Roland returned to the sentencing report. The federal investigation had uncovered evidence of Victoria's involvement in the deaths or disappearances of 11 children across multiple states. Her meticulously documented research files had provided law enforcement with evidence linking her to cases that had been cold for years. The Montana facility had been converted into a legitimate treatment center for children recovering from trauma, a final irony that Roland found satisfying. The building that Victoria had intended as a torture chamber was now helping children heal from experiences similar to what she had inflicted. Roland's private phone rang, displaying an unknown number from a federal area code. Mr. Winters? This is Agent Sarah Walsh, FBI. I wanted to update you on a development in the Holloway case. What kind of development? Victoria Holloway was found dead in her cell this morning. Apparent suicide, though the investigation is ongoing. Roland absorbed this information without emotion. I see. Given your role in exposing her operation, I thought you should be informed directly. There's no evidence suggesting anything other than suicide, and her death doesn't affect the ongoing prosecutions of her network. Thank you for letting me know. After ending the call, Roland sat quietly for several minutes. Victoria's death meant that Danny would never have to testify about what she'd done to him, never have to face his mother in a courtroom and relive his trauma for the sake of justice. It also meant that Roland would never have the satisfaction of knowing she was suffering in prison for the rest of her life. But perhaps quick death was a fair trade for his son's continued innocence. Marcus returned to the office alone. Danny is completely absorbed in the construction models. He wants to know if he can design his own building. Tell him he can design whatever he wants. We'll figure out how to build it. Roland stood and walked to the window. Agent Walsh called. Victoria is dead. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. Prison justice or genuine suicide? Unknown, and I don't particularly care. Roland turned back to his security chief. What's the status on the other loose ends? All handled. The 3 men who were planning to testify in exchange for reduced sentences have been discouraged from doing so. Trevor Holloway's protective custody placement has been upgraded to ensure his long-term safety. Roland nodded. Despite Trevor's cooperation, the man had still participated in killing 3 children. But his testimony had been crucial to exposing Victoria's network, and Roland honored his agreements. And the families of Victoria's victims? Anonymous payments have been made to cover therapy, medical expenses, and education costs for all surviving victims. The families of the children who died have received substantial settlements from a foundation established for that purpose. Roland had used his wealth systematically to address the damage Victoria had caused, though he knew that money could never truly heal the wounds she'd inflicted. But it could provide resources for recovery and ensure that her victims had every possible advantage in rebuilding their lives. Sir, Marcus hesitated, which was unusual for him. There's something else you should know. What? The federal investigation expanded beyond what we expected. They've identified similar operations in other countries, a network of facilities using Victoria's methods and documentation. International law enforcement is now involved. Roland felt a familiar coldness settle in his chest. Victoria's death might have ended her personal operation, but her methodology was apparently spreading like a cancer through an international network. How extensive? Preliminary reports suggest facilities in at least 6 countries. The documentation Victoria kept was apparently shared with other researchers. Roland walked back to his desk and opened a locked drawer that contained files he'd hoped never to use again. Inside were contact information for people who specialized in problems that required solutions outside the legal system. Marcus, I want complete intelligence on every facility, every operator, every financier involved in this network. Sir, the federal government is all ready. The federal government is bound by laws, treaties, and jurisdictions. Roland's voice carried the finality of an avalanche. I'm not. Marcus understood immediately. Full intelligence gathering, or target assessment. Both. Victoria might be dead, but her methodology is still out there, still being used to hurt children. That's unacceptable. Roland had spent 7 years systematically destroying Victoria's operation within the United States. Now it appeared he would be spending the next several years extending that work internationally. But as he watched Danny through the conference room window, completely absorbed in designing imaginary buildings with infectious joy, Roland felt the same cold satisfaction he'd experienced when Victoria was finally arrested. Some structures needed to be demolished completely, reduced to ash and rubble, before something healthy could be built in their place. Victoria's network was one of those structures, and Roland had both the resources and the ruthless patience necessary to see the job through to completion. The foundation had been reset. His son was safe and beginning to heal. And Roland had identified his next construction project, systematically dismantling every piece of the international network that had grown for Victoria's research. It would take time, resources, and methods that would never appear in any official report. But when it was finished, children around the world would be safer, and the methodology that Victoria had developed would exist only in the secured evidence rooms of law enforcement agencies. Roland picked up his phone and began making calls. There was work to be done, and Roland Winters had never walked away from a job before it was completed to his satisfaction. The game was far from over. It was just expanding to a global scale. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.